Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey peoples, today we're going to take a look at Warhammer Quest Silver Tower from Games Workshop. This is the latest in their line of board games, which they've really been amping up the production of over the last couple of years. Although, of course, traditionally, just in case you don't know, Games Workshop is typically does miniature war games. And in fact, this is set in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, which is one of the two majors, Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k, which is the futuristic sci-fi setting. But they are both really heavy, numbers-intensive, time-intensive, hobby miniaturist modeling war games. This is an encapsulated board game form of that. And more specifically, Warhammer Quest was a game, I think, from the 80s that many other games were based off of, like Hero Quest. This has been a much requested reprint. People have wanted a new version of Warhammer Quest for a very long time. They got a video game version. I don't think that did much to quell people's desire to see a new version of the physical board game. Now, I will say up front, I have not played the original version. Sacrilege. But I just never had the opportunity. It's long out of print. It's hard to get, so on and so forth. This is not an exact reprint of the original Warhammer Quest. Rather, this is a spiritual successor. Same name, same basic premise. It's a dungeon-crawling, cooperative fantasy game. You take control of heroes from the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Well, specifically the Age of Sigmar universe, which is a point of contention for some fans. I'm not really going to delve into all of that. But you'll take control of like a war priest and a knight and a Tenebral Shroud, which is like a rogue type character. And you're going into this place called the Silver Tower, which is like this magical fortress, tower, if you will, from the Chaos God Tzeentch, who's one of the major players in the Warhammer Fantasy universe and even in the 40k universe as well. He's got this magically shifting tower that's always changing, hence the random generation of dungeons from a dungeon crawler, where it's always flooding with monsters, and it's controlled by this the Gaunt Summoner, which is the main adversary of the game, who controls all the other monsters in the tower. Your goal is to go through each of these different trials, which is basically sessions of the game, trying to find the shards of this amulet, put them all together, and eventually fight the Gaunt Summoner. Now, there's much more to it than that. There's storytelling involved by basically reading books out of an adventure book that you have and leveling up your characters. Lots and lots of different things. So let me go ahead and give you a brief look, not that brief, of how the game is played. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think.
Warhammer Quest Silver Tower is a fully cooperative game for 2 to 4 players. It's a dungeon-crawling game with randomly generated rooms based on bits of story from an adventure book. From session to session, you're simply trying to complete the trial at hand, but ultimately your goal is to assemble the 8 fragments of the Amulet of Tzeentch, which allows you to have the final showdown with the Gaunt Summoner himself. To start, I'll just give you a look at the miniatures, unpainted, of course. All of these must be assembled beforehand, requiring glue and sprue cutters at the very least. It is a very laborious process. Note that adversaries come in different sculpts, and this matters during the game. Different sculpts have slightly different abilities, even within the same enemy group. The game has a standard rulebook, but you will also constantly be using the adventure book. While the beginning of the book gets you started with your first trial, you'll be skipping back and forth between numbered story passages and reading them aloud as you discover them on the exploration cards. In the back are alternate character builds and optional exotic adversaries. Every player will choose a hero before you start the game. There are 6 main heroes, each with their own miniature and character card. These are promo cards, the normal ones are not foil. You'll also get a set of 4 6-sided action dice in a single color. One player gets the Rune of Tzeentch, signifying the rotating start player, and the person who sets up rooms and has to make certain important decisions. All players have different special abilities, of course, and the War Priest hero actually starts with a Gryph-hound companion, complete with miniature. It's worth noting here that while the heroes have stat cards, the adversary stats are only found in the back of the guidebook. Hero miniatures always begin on the Ingress tile, the only tile that is not double-sided. Throughout the course of the game, you'll be tasked with putting out many more double-sided tiles, specifically referred to as chambers, with their own features and openings as you explore. Everything starts from the opening of the ingress chamber. The last bit of setup involves the Fate board, which is used in every trial and is placed off to the side. Here you'll shuffle and place the purple treasure cards and blue heroes skill cards. Every hero will have a renown marker matching their dice color that starts at the beginning of the renown track. There's also another set of 6-sided dice, the purple destiny dice, which are placed here and which I'll explain in a moment. Whether you're starting your first trial or venturing off on your own into the tower, the process of adventuring works the same. A particular trial will tell you which exploration cards to use to make the deck, based on symbols in the top corner, and then it will tell you what your goal is and how to sort the deck in a particular way. Exploration cards tell you which tile to place next, which passages in the book to read, if necessary, and other special rules and conditions for that chamber. The newly made exploration deck goes next to the ingress passage, and it will actually move along from opening to opening as you continue to explore. Every round of the game occurs in phases. First is the Destiny phase. Whoever has the rune will roll all of the purple dice. Any dice that are unique will be placed onto the blue spaces on the Fate board. These dice can be used by any player during the course of the current round for any action they like, as I'll describe soon. When used, they're gone, so they must be used sparingly. But also, to keep one player from using all of them, when you use one purple die, if there are any left, the highest remaining die gets locked until the next player's turn. Now, any dice that weren't unique, dice that matched up with other dice in other words, can lead to grave consequences. This will not happen if your group is still on the ingress tile, but after that, if this situation occurs, you must refer to the back of the guidebook, where it will tell you what to do. You might have to roll randomly on the adversary tables, which are the primary way monsters enter the game. Small familiars may be summoned to the chamber, which cause deleterious effects for the heroes. You might even have a good result, but probably not. After the Destiny phase is the hero phase. Starting with the rune-carrying player, every hero takes their turn in order. The first thing you do on your turn is roll all 4 of your action dice and line them up on the boxes on your card. Dice are the fuel for your actions. Some basic actions just require that you spend any dice with any number, but others require that you spend dice of a certain number or higher. You can take an action as many times as you like, as long as you have the dice to make it happen. Every hero can explore with any die, which the rune player of the first round must do first to get the game going. If ever your miniature is at the edge of an opening on the current chamber, you can take this action to flip up the top card from the exploration deck, place out the indicated tile, and any features of the new chamber. At least one portal is usually placed, which represents entrance points for monsters. You may also be told to roll on the adversary tables to place those monsters now. As the heroes press forward, older chambers that are too far behind will actually vanish. This keeps you from running out of table space, pragmatically, and prevents the other heroes from backtracking too far to avoid adversaries. Every hero can also spend any die to move up to their speed, as indicated on their card. And yes, diagonals count in this game. You can move through friendly miniatures, but not adversaries. If you start your move next to an adversary, you are in fact pinned, and you'll need to make an agility check to move away. Roll a spare die. If the number is equal to or higher than your hero's agility, you can freely move away. Otherwise, you're stuck. Adversaries, by the way, suffer the same effect with regards to the heroes pinning them. The last of the basic actions is recuperate. You can spend a die to simply heal a wound, and you can do this multiple times. The first time you do this within a single turn, you just need a die with a 1 or higher on it, but the second time you'll need a die with a 2 or higher, the third time you'll need a 3 or higher, and so on. Every other action is unique to the heroes. You might spend dice to activate special abilities. For instance, the War Priest can heal party members or activate and command his Gryph-hound by spending certain numbered dice, and the Knight can go into defensive stances or draw enemies to him. But much of the time, you'll just be attacking. Every hero has 2 or 3 attacks of escalating power. The more powerful the attack, the higher the die that's required to activate it. Ranges for attacks might be combat range, which is adjacent, missile range, which is line of sight, or area range, which is every enemy in a specific chamber. Regardless, once activated, you will roll the same die that you spent and try to meet or beat the specific hit number for your attack. If you do, you'll deal a certain amount of wounds. Enemies can take wounds up to their vigor level before dying. If you do deal the killing blow, you gain a renown on the renown track of the Fate board. Every character also has unique ways to gain renown. For instance, the Mistweaver gets an extra renown if her special attack hits, and the Shroud gets 2 extra renown if he can wound 3 different adversaries on his turn. Now, why is renown so important? If your tracker makes it all the way around and back to the start, you gain a skill. You take the top 2 skill cards, choose one, and discard the other. Skills give you permanent buffs, like extra stat bonuses, special abilities, or even entirely new ways to spend your dice. However, you may only keep skills between trials if you have the amulet shards. After the heroes, the adversaries have their phase. The rune-carrying player activates each adversary group one at a time. On their stat page in the book, each adversary has stats and special abilities just like the heroes, but they also have a behavior table. The rune-carrying player rolls on that table and follows the instructions, moving, attacking, and using abilities as indicated. Here I'll note that heroes can, of course, take wounds. They, however, have a chance to avoid it. When successfully hit by an adversary's attack, you roll a die. If the number is equal to or higher than your save value, you avoid taking the wound. But if you do inevitably get wounded, you place a wound marker on top of one of your dice spots. Until you heal that wound, you roll 1 less die every turn. If all the spots are filled and you would be wounded again, you are knocked out of the current trial altogether with grievous wounds. Once the round is over, the rune passes to the next player and a new round begins. In the event all the adversaries are cleared from a chamber but the trial is not yet over, before they explore again, the heroes can have a brief respite during their phase. First, they must check to make sure they're not ambushed by roving bands of adversaries. Roll a die, add all the players' skill cards, and if the result is 9 or higher, you're jacked. If not, the players can take actions. If they are wounded, they can roll a d3, which is a d6 divided by 2 and rounded down, to heal back that many wounds. Or they may choose to search for treasure by rolling a die and hoping to get 4 or more. If they succeed, you can grab a treasure card from the top of the deck. Treasures offer beneficial effects much like skills, but usually less dramatic, and many times they are one-time use effects where you discard the card afterwards. The game continues on in rounds until you've either met the goal of the trial and teleported on to the next one, or all of the heroes die, of course. Now, on to my final thoughts. Now, I will reiterate up front as a disclaimer here that I have not played the original Warhammer Quest, which I understand that it would have been valuable to have a point of reference to compare the two. I just didn't have an easy enough opportunity to do so, and I think there is some value in coming to this with a fresh set of eyes and not basing it on previous iterations of the game, because I've seen some people have a very negative reaction to this new version because it's not like the original in some pretty significant ways, which I don't know all the details of. I will also say as a disclaimer up front that there is an app that goes along with this game. It's very simple to find, the Warhammer Quest Silver Tower app. I think it's for both iOS and Android, or at least it's for Android. That's the version that I have. It's neat, but basically it's just extra content for the game that you have to purchase. More characters. Of course, you need to supply the models, which they do exist if you want to purchase them. Otherwise, you can just proxy in the models that come with the game. New adventurers, new monsters. You can fight orcs and all the other crazy monsters from the Warhammer Fantasy universe. And just basically it's a way for you to keep track of the stats as you play the game. You don't even need to necessarily roll the dice. It kind of does it for you if you want to use it for that reason. And it is free, but it costs money to buy all the extra packs, extra treasure, extra characters, so on and so forth. It's neat, but I'm not there yet. I've explored much of the game. I haven't explored anywhere near all of it. So, and even if I did, there's random stuff going on. So I'm not to the point yet where I need to buy a bunch of extra stuff. Also, even if you went out and bought the miniatures for the game, the tiles are all still the same, so it would be interesting to have more tiles themed to the different monsters that you're fighting, like the Oryx, but regardless, I'm just not going to touch too much on the app here. So this is already long enough as it is, so let's just jump right into the main review. I really enjoyed this game. Surprisingly, and I say surprisingly because I've been kind of hit or miss with the other Warhammer or Games Workshop Warhammer 40k or fantasy themed games. For instance, like Space Hulk is great, but the Assassinorum Execution Force I thought was fine gameplay wise, but had no replayability whatsoever.
This game actually has a lot of the same elements of Assassin Arm Execution Force, but the replayability is, I think, through the roof. Of course, I don't know that yet, because I haven't played the game 50 to 100 times. I've played it 4 times, but I think that with, not even counting the app, take the app out of the equation, because of how much content you have right in the box, so many different exploration cards, so many different setups and random variables as to how the monsters come out, and all of these different things, I think there's a ton of replayability right out of the box, and that was very important to me. On top of which, I love the way the heroes are handled in this game. I really do. I love the dice mechanism, again, which I've seen before, but here it just seems to work very, very well. You roll the dice, it's very simple, but also leads to a lot of strategy, a lot of decision making on top of just the normal decisions that you make as to who you attack and all that stuff. But now it's like, okay, do I use this dice for this or this? Do I go into a defensive stance? Do I use the dice just to attack, or do I use this opportunity to recuperate? If you're the war priest, now you can command your Gryph-hounds. Do I use it for my special ability now? Is that the best thing to do? Do we just need to focus fire and kill this thing? But all of this has to do with those dice, on top of which you have the Destiny dice. Such a neat mechanism. Because now, this is a fully cooperative game, which I appreciate as well. I'm so glad they didn't go the Overlord route for this, which I don't know if that was how the original was or not. I don't think it was. But so glad they didn't go that way. And the Destiny dice is a communal, shared, cooperative thing, where it's like, who is going to benefit the most from that in this round? You can't be greedy and take it. You're all in it together. And I love that thing. And I love that you're like, if I take that die, I'm only going to be able to do this once or twice because the other dice, the dice get locked. And then the dice that I use, it's gone forever. Well, for the rest of the round. And none of my other compatriots are going to be able to use it. So again, important critical decisions, and done in a very neat way, I think. Every character is so different, too. Everyone's got a different power suite, different attacks, different special abilities, different stats, different... one of them's got a companion. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I love that little bit. And also, I love the fact that they all can gain renown in a different way. I mean, they can all kill monsters to do it, but then they each have their own unique way to do it, which is like a callback to another Warhammer Fantasy game from Fantasy Flight, Chaos in the Old World. Very different games, but in that game, you played the Chaos Gods, ironically, including Tzeentch, and you could turn your dial, the Chaos dial in that game, in a different way, which made the game very asymmetric in a lot of ways. Not quite as asymmetric here in Warhammer Quest Silver Tower, but still, I love that little bit that gives every character just a little more uniqueness. And that makes it more palatable to play as either the same character, or even to switch it up if you want, from adventure to adventure. Just if you choose to do the same one over and over again, you still feel like you're getting, you're leveling up in different ways, especially with the skill cards. Another interesting thing. And it keeps the power suppressed in a reasonable way, because you need to meet certain milestones in the game. Milestones, in this case, being the shards. So you can only have a certain number of skills based on how many shards you've taken, the group as a whole. And I think that's an interesting way to keep the power levels from spiraling too much, and to keep the challenges consistent. And I think the game is pretty balanced in the regard that it's based on the number of players, and again, your skills can be kept in check, and things just get harder and harder as you progress through the adventures, and I haven't even gotten to the hardest ones yet. But it's also interesting because it's a random dungeon, so the God Summoner might just pop out in like the first adventure just to spray you with this massive attack and then flee again. So there's really cool little bits like that. I love the story elements of it, reading the chapters from the book. People in my group complained about how, you always have to constantly flip to another chapter and read it, but I'm used to that from Kingdom Death, so it didn't bother me so much. And I love the thematic element there. I love reading the little story bits, and even though I think it's not the most intensive thematic storytelling game, because it is still kind of feel like generic fantasy, those kind of things help get you into it. So I do really appreciate that. And then component-wise, love the artwork. The miniatures are very high quality. And it just, all of the artwork, even like the bits in the book, it all just feels very good and really gets you into the game. Alright, so I just completely lathered up this game and talked it up to great length. And I didn't even touch on the monsters. The monsters are great. Such a huge variety of monsters. The treasure cards, how the renown actually works and all that different stuff is all great. So, having said all that good stuff, What's the bad stuff? Because no game is perfect, and certainly Warhammer Quest Silver Tower is not perfect. There are some significant impediments to the game. I would call them barriers to entry, which, if it was a lesser game, if the good stuff was not as good, would probably kill it for me. But I think that the good stuff far outweighs it. But it is significant and worth mentioning. So first and foremost, going back to the components, miniatures. There's a lot of them. They all have to be assembled. It is a huge pain in the ass. Okay? Now, some of you watching, and I'm fully aware of this, are saying, tons of high quality miniatures. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to put them together and model them, put them in different poses and paint them. Awesome. I love you guys and girls. I wish I was like you. I envy you that. I am not. And so for me, and I think a lot of other people who are coming from a board game background as opposed to a miniatures wargaming background, it's going to be a huge barrier of entry. And in fact, this review was much delayed. I could have, based on plays, I could have reviewed this a week ago, but I had to put together the miniatures. I was proxying in the miniatures from other games just to get the game played because it was so time consuming. But again, I'm not super experienced with it, so maybe your mileage might vary on that. There's other bits of the game that are kind of not user-friendly. I mentioned flipping back through the book to read the passages, which wasn't a big deal for me. What was a bigger deal and not necessary, it didn't have to be that way, was the fact that all the enemy stats are in the backs of the books. But why? I mean, the game is very expensive. That's another barrier to entry. It's $150 or something like that, depending on where you live. So for that amount of money, could you not have had stat cards for the monsters? I don't understand that at all. Even if they're not the big stat cards like the heroes, why not even smaller ones just to give us the information and the behavior tables? Super important. And when you have big melees with like 3 different enemy groups on the table, you're flipping between multiple pages. You still have to go back and read story passages at the same time. It's a big pain in the ass. And I felt that it was super unnecessary. I don't know why they had to do that. In fact, given again the price of the game, you could have had the story on the cards too. Had a deck of story cards that you flip through and read to. Very easy. Much better in my opinion. You can even keep track of where you've been without having to put like little sticker notes in the book. So I do wish that things like that were much more user friendly. And I will say that overall, this isn't like the most earth-shattering experience because it's still a dungeon crawling game set in a somewhat generic fantasy universe. I know Warhammer Fantasy is not generic, but this implementation of it doesn't have a lot of the characterization, I think, of some of the other Warhammer properties, unless you like read the passages in the back of the book. But regardless of all that, I still think it's a solid game. Certainly one of the best board games that Games Workshop has put out so far. And with the app, and with, I think they're going to do more expansions in the future, hopefully, I think there's a ton of replayability here. But even by itself, there's replayability. So for all of that, yes, I know it's expensive. Yes, I know the barriers to entry are there, like putting the miniatures together. But I'm going to say it's a worthwhile endeavor if you have the funds for it, if you have the time for it, because it was a lot of fun. And I'm looking forward to playing it again right away. That is Warhammer Quest Silver Tower from Games Workshop. High recommendation.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.